everyone, and welcome to the YWCA 2026 Until Justice wrap up. To lead us today, I want to introduce YWCA USA's Director of State Advocacy and Network Engagement, Christine Sloan.
My name is Christine Sloan. Pronouns are she, her. I'm here at YWCA USA, and I lead the voting rights work along with my colleagues on YWCA USA's public policy and advocacy team. I also was very privileged to get to be part of the team that helped to curate some of the challenge content that you all have been reviewing over the last several weeks. We really, really hope that you found what was shared informational, inspiring, a little, head knocking, but that we really hope that it made you think and helped you get really deep into what we're talking about here today, the theme being voting rights, racial justice, two issues that are inextricably intertwined. So thanks to you, thanks to your communities, thanks to everyone who's been participating in the Until Justice Challenge this year. So today we are really, really thrilled that you'll be hearing from Laura Williamson of Southern Poverty Law Center. You'll be hearing from Michaela White from YWCA Mahoning Valley, and from our very own Paige Robar here at YWCA USA. We're going to walk through where we are today, perspectives on policies and the courts. We're going to hear some really insightful YWCA perspectives. We're going to have time for questions in between both of those sections, and then we will close out this year's Until Justice Just Is work for this year and until next year. So let's go ahead and dive in. I am so thrilled to welcome you, Laura Williamson. If we can go to next slide, there you are. I'll let you introduce yourself and then get into the nitty gritty with us. Take it away.
Great. Well, good afternoon. I am so pleased and privileged to be here with y'all today. I've heard so much about the campaign, and I'm just thrilled to be able to be part of this closing moment in it. I am Laura Williamson. I'm a senior policy advisor for democracy and voting rights at the Southern Poverty Law Center. We're a nonprofit organization working for racial justice, economic prosperity, and multiracial democracy in the Deep South. I myself am from North Carolina. I saw a couple of you in the chat. Mebane, I'm from Hillsborough, Charlotte, and then the North Carolina there. I love it. I'm here with you as a Tar Heel. And yeah, here we are to talk about democracy in progress, and it very much is in progress. Emphasis on that dynamism there. 250 years into this great democratic experiment, I think we're at an inflection point, like as of this week, actually last week. And I will say my presentation will start with some not so rosy updates on the state of voting rights, but I feel actually, pretty hopeful about where we can go from here, especially because I think we are at this turning point just in the last several days. So let's dig into that. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to talk about both the federal and the state assault on the right to vote. Y'all are in the states, probably, depending on where you are, this has been a long-standing assault, but especially in the last year and a half with this new administration, it's been all-out war from the federal government as well. So we're going to start there. But again, there's a big caveat to all the doom and gloom that I'll start with, and we'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about what each of us can do and take questions. Next slide, please. Right. So folks may be familiar with our present Supreme Court and know that the recent decision that we had last week in Calais, Louisiana v. Calais, which we're going to talk about later, was devastating. I mean, utterly and completely devastating, but not the first blow against voting rights from the Supreme Court. However, the attacks that we've seen from the other branches of government, Congress and the White House, are in some ways unprecedented over the last many, many years. So let's talk about each of those in order. We can start with the next slide. Congress, and this is like the most ominous photo of Congress I could find. The main thing to know about the attack on the right to vote and the attempt to prevent millions and millions of eligible U.S. citizen voters from exercising their freedom to vote is the SAVE Act. You can see the full name there. We just call it the SAVE Act. There have been a couple of iterations introduced in recent months, the Save America Act and the Make Elections Great Again Act, but it's all the SAVE Act. It's all the same effort by certain politicians in Washington to prevent many of us, including many women, from actually voting and from exercising our freedom to vote. There's a link there in case the slides are circulated later with top line talking points on the bills, in case that's useful. Next slide. What does the SAVE Act actually do? Here's another link to a very detailed document with broken out by various communities and the impacts that the bill would have on those communities. But the TLDR, the sort of top line, is that there are more than 21 million U.S. citizens, eligible American voters, who don't have easy access to the type of documents that this bill would require. The main thing that the SAVE Act does is it says you will have to show documents like a passport or a birth certificate to be able to register to vote. And again, tens of millions of people don't have ready access to those. And in particular, married women and others who've changed their name, such as survivors of intimate partner and or sexual violence, that the YWCA sort of brought to our attention at the federal level as another community to be impacted by this. Rural voters, low-income voters, disabled and elderly voters, voters of color who fall into all of those categories, all would have a harder time, if not find it impossible, to register and vote under this bill. The bill also would upend voter registration as we know it. It would end decades of voter registration modernization that have made our registration lists more complete and accurate and secure by requiring voters to register in person at an election office. That's the only way you could register. So registering online, gone. Registering by mail, gone. Again, those are huge burdens for voters with disabilities, elderly voters, rural voters who may live hours from their local election office. Automatic voter registration would also be impacted because much of that happens at the DMV, which is staffed by people who are not themselves election officials. So tremendous negative impact on our ability to register on many levels. And then finally, the bill takes aim at election officials by creating enormous additional administrative burdens for them that go in effect overnight. The bill would take effect the moment after enactment with no funding to actually do that. And in fact, instead of funding, they slap criminal penalties on election officials for making honest mistakes under those extraordinarily difficult circumstances. So really bad, TLDR, really bad. The good news is it's stalled for now in the Senate, but this is unfortunately the bill that will never die. It keeps rearing its ugly head, and we as community members who are fired up about this and outraged, keep batting it down. And so it doesn't seem to be moving right now at this moment, and it's going to come back up at some point. And so grateful for all of the work of the YWCA members for helping to beat it back in the past, and stay tuned for the next chapter in that saga. You can go to the next slide, please. All right, the executive branch, the White House. Now, this photo has nothing to do with voting rights, in fact, but I think it was just, for me, it's a kind of like visceral illustration of the attacks and in some cases, demolition of our democracy. This is, of course, the demolition of part of the White House to create Mr. Trump's personal gilded ballroom. So the attacks from the executive branch come from multiple angles, take multiple forms. One is at the Election Assistance Commission, which is a federal agency meant to support states and election officials in administering safe, accessible, and secure elections. And when each time that the SAVE Act is stalled in Congress legislatively, anti-voter activists will turn to the EAC and try to push through their agenda there, including trying to require voters who use the federal voter registration form that the EAC provides to show their papers, to show documents that they may or may not have. Those efforts have stalled to date too, although the state of Louisiana recently sued the EAC to force them to require this show me your papers requirement. And so now that particular question is in the courts. Again, as each of these efforts have stalled, they've not given up. They've kept throwing things at the wall, and the White House has issued not one, but two anti-voter executive orders in the last year and change, March and 2025 and 2026, respectively. And these executive orders do all kinds of, it's a parade of horribles. They take aim particularly at voting by mail, trying to end it all together. They also try to have the show me your papers requirement and do that sort of administratively, which is illegal. They require the DOJ and the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, which houses ICE, to engage in sort of data sharing about sensitive information, a whole host of other very concerning things that are, to be clear, outside of the president's authority for the most part, which is why the executive order from last year has largely been blocked in the courts. And the executive order from a couple of months ago is also in the courts and likely to be blocked. Not content to stop there, the DOJ has been trying to secure that sensitive voter data, sometimes including, tons of PPI, social security numbers, et cetera, trying to secure those from the states themselves by coercing the states to provide those voter registration lists. The states many of them have said no, more than half have refused, and now the DOJ is suing them to try to compel them to turn over that sensitive information on their voters. Meanwhile, folks may have seen a few months ago, the FBI raided an election office in Georgia and Fulton County, and also in Arizona and Maricopa County, just trying to cast doubt on the integrity of the elections and sow distrust and, relitigate a thing that has been litigated so many times about, the big lie and the president having lost the 2020 election. And then finally, on the executive side, probably not finally, there's probably more things, but finally, for our purposes today, the Department of Homeland Security operates a database called the SAVE database, separate from the SAVE Act, kind of confusing. But that is a database created for a whole other purpose, and they have sort of weaponized it and tried to turn it into a national voter file, again, using, in many cases, flawed and faulty data, and then compelled states to run their list through this database and remove voters who show up as alleged non-citizens. And there's just countless, the error rate is extraordinary, and it's a real threat to legitimate eligible voters on the rolls. You can go to the next slide. Oh man, this should have been the one with the storm clouds behind it, because the Supreme Court. Here we are. I'm actually going to talk about Louisiana v. Calais last, because that's what we have the most to say on. But just really briefly, there's the devastating and just transformational in the wrong direction decision we got from the court on that last week. It's not the only voting rights case in front of the court. There's also a case called Watson v. RNC out of Mississippi, which deals with mail voting. And it is specifically state laws that allow mail or absentee ballots to arrive a couple of days or up to 5 days after Election Day, which is incredibly important for military and overseas voters, voters who live in rural areas who are facing mail service delays. Again, many states have these laws on the books, and the Supreme Court is considering whether they are in fact lawful or should be struck down, which would be devastating for many of us who vote by mail. And again, especially those communities I mentioned. They haven't ruled on this yet. They've heard oral arguments. We expect the ruling to come down in a couple of months, certainly by the end of the term at the end of June. Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians v. Howe is a case out of North Dakota, out of Indian country. And it deals with the question of whether or not individuals like you or I have the right to sue to vindicate our voting rights under the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This case actually hasn't been argued. It's been sort of appealed to the Supreme Court, and they're waiting to see if it will be. This is going to be impacted by the Calais decision last week. But essentially the question of whether or not we can actually have our day in court to avail ourselves to our voting rights if if the state or some other body discriminates against us. Really important case that we'll see what happens with that. But let me go back to Louisiana v. Calais. So this is, oh my goodness. The genesis of this case is the 2020 census and redistricting process that followed it. The state of Louisiana drew a map after that census that gave Black voters, Black Louisianans, the opportunity to elect candidates of choice in only one of 6 congressional districts, even though they make up a third of the population. So you would think they would have the opportunity to elect candidates of choice in 2 of those 6 congressional districts, but this map did not allow them to do that because it unlawfully discriminated against them, which is what a federal court found and said, no, Louisiana, you have to draw a new map that gives Black voters the opportunity to elect their preferred candidates in 2 of your 6 congressional districts. They did that, and we have an excellent map presently in Louisiana that was in place in 2024 and elected, lo and behold, 2 Black members of Congress. But promptly after the state passed that map, a group of self-described non-African-American voters or white voters sued the state, saying that map was unlawful because it considered race sort of improperly. And fast forward to last week, the Supreme Court ultimately agreed with that argument. And it struck down Louisiana's map. And it didn't stop there. It actually essentially gutted the section of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that allows voters of color to, again, have their day in court seeking fair representation. Now, this is not the beginning of the story. The Supreme Court, as I mentioned at the top, has come for voting rights for years. There was another devastating case in 2013 called Shelby County v. Holder, where the Supreme Court gutted a whole separate section of the Voting Rights Act that protected voters from discriminatory laws in advance. It was called preclearance. And then in between the Shelby decision and last week's Kelly decision, in a case from 2021 called Brnovich v. DNC, they gutted another section, another part of Section 2 of the bill, which protected voters from discriminatory voters nationwide from discriminatory laws and practices that prevented them from voting. So taken together, they've basically rendered the Voting Rights of 1965 a dead letter, and that's actually the language that Justice Kagan used in her dissent. I mean, there aren't even words. It's truly devastating, and is going to transform our democracy for the worse. However, I'm going to do one more slide on the doom and gloom, and then we're going to get to the however. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So again, folks are probably familiar with the many years long state assault on the freedom to vote, the right to vote. Since Shelby County v. Holder, we've seen well over 100 anti-voter laws passed, especially in the South, but not just. It's been all over the country. And many of them have happened in the last 5 years since the 2020 election, again, sort of in the wake of the big lie and efforts to prevent the people of color who helped, show their power and transform our democracy in 2020 from voting. The list here is just a couple of the most egregious ones we've seen. There are similar show me your papers laws passing at the state level as we speak, that sort of copycats to the federal one. There's efforts to make it easier for states to kick people off the voter rolls. They're called voter purges, and sort of accompanying measures to make it easier for bad actors to challenge the legitimacy and the eligibility of people on the registration rolls. And you all will be unsurprised to know that they are largely challenging people of color. There's bans on what's called line warming, which is bringing people food or water or sunblock or an umbrella or a chair in line while they wait in long lines to vote. And we know that lines are longer in communities of color. Closed polling places, largely in communities of color. There's a sort of growing set of restrictions on community support for the voting process. So voter registration drives at churches or HBCUs or other universities, at community fairs, the kind of just community engagement and registration that's happened and has been a staple of civic engagement in the Black community and other communities of color for decades. States are passing laws to make that illegal, essentially. They're also passing laws to make it illegal, a felony in some cases, to actually help your neighbors return their mail-in ballots. And that gets to this point sort of towards the end of this list, which is the trend towards criminalizing the voting process, criminalizing people if they make a mistake in their registration, criminalizing people who thought that they were eligible, for example, because they're in Florida, and Florida recently passed an amendment restoring the voting rights of people with felony convictions. And then, coming for them literally, Florida has an election crimes police force that is coming for people literally in the middle of the night, predominantly people of color, terrorizing them, arresting them for exercising their freedom to vote when they thought they were eligible to. And in many cases were. I mean, many of those cases have been dropped. Again, criminalization of helping your neighbor. You help your elderly neighbor return their absentee ballot, you can be slapped with a felony. And then the final theme I just want to lift up right here, and I promise we're turning to the good stuff, is all of this is sort of, especially the constantly changing nature of these laws year to year, especially in the South, is creating enormous burden for election officials and election administrators who actually have to make these laws, implement these laws, usually with no additional funding. And then on top of that, there's the attacks on election workers, like I mentioned, the criminalization if they make mistakes, doxing, threats, all of that. It's a gloomy picture, but, and you can go to the next slide now. But, people have been resisting all along, of course. But, and I don't know, I'd love to hear when we open up for questions and discussion. The last several days have been extraordinary. SPLC's based in the South, focused on the South. unsurprisingly, it's the South that has legislators, white legislators in the South who've moved immediately to try to pass new maps to silence or attempt to silence Black and brown voices, especially Black voices in the South. And the response has been, again, extraordinary. Some of these mobilizations have been organized in a matter of hours or overnight. And we're getting, thousands and thousands of people showing up to voice their outrage. The photo on the bottom here is from Alabama in front of the state house there, and the photo in the middle is from Tennessee. Neither represent the breadth of these demonstrations, but they just show how both outraged and also motivated people are. I think, some have argued that we've been in the midst of a third Reconstruction for a while now. Third Reconstruction meaning, the first, of course, was in the wake of the Civil War, when Black Americans won their freedom from slavery, and Black men at least won their freedom to vote. Second Reconstruction being the Civil Rights Movement. And then third Reconstruction, there have been folks who've been arguing that we're in that right now. I think if we weren't before, we potentially are after the decision last week. The organizers across the South have said to me, without it, multiple of them have said to me, people are coming out of the woodworks. It's unlike anything I've ever seen. They've awakened the beast, the good beast, our beast. So I think there's really some extraordinary opportunity here. And if there, let's skip the video. I have a couple videos here in this sort of tall one. You can see organizers have taken over the hearing room in Tennessee and are singing "Ain't Nobody Gonna Turn Me Around." It's really powerful. And then this link is to a video from Civic Tennessee, which is extraordinary. It shows just how many people were there and the righteous outrage and the joyful resistance. But maybe we can circulate those afterward, because I want to get to our last slide and then open it up. So what can you do? There's actually a lot to do. Everything I said, most of what I said is depressing, to put it mildly. But at the end of the day, right, in a democracy, we do still have a democracy, and it's the people who have the power at the end of the day. One thing for sure is vote in this year's elections and every election, but also check your registration in advance. Make sure, and this is of course things that you can do yourselves, but pass along to your communities. Check your registration in advance. There's many states now that are sort of trying to kick people off the rolls, and the federal government, as I mentioned, is trying to make that happen too. So just make sure that, especially well ahead of registration deadlines, that you're actually registered at your current address. And then fill out the census, once a decade census, but also any sort of interim American Community Survey opportunities or invitations that you get, because at the end of the day, if we're talking about fair representation, it is being counted is the very first step in that. But those are individual actions you can take, but it's really this next one, public education and mobilization, that has got me feeling hopeful in these last few days. Just seeing the tremendous outpouring of folks showing up. There were folks in Alabama last night who were in the state capitol during a tornado warning and a flood, because they were trying to make their voices heard and resist what is happening there. I'd recommend, if you're in a state, if you have the privilege of being in a state that hasn't made moves yet to try to prevent Black and brown people from making their voices heard, call and write your state lawmakers and urge them to resist calls to do that. There's a handful of southern states moving right now, but that's not going to be the end of it. A bunch more states are going to move after the midterms to try to change the maps before the 2028 election. So be ready for that. And if you are in one of those states that's already moving, show up, go to the Capitol. I mean, there's calls right now. Alabama, Louisiana, Tennessee, go to the Capitol and log your dissent and your outrage. Show up and slow them down and potentially stop them. Join a local organization if you're not already. That's a silly thing to say to y'all. So I'll stop there. But the last thing I'll say is SPLC is doing a series of called Voices for Voting Rights, which is a series of events across the country where we are inviting community into conversation about the issue and to share their stories and their testimony. I unfortunately don't have a link to the website yet because we're just getting the project off the ground, but I'll follow up with Christine and Paige with that in case y'all want to plug into any of those. We'd be delighted to partner with the YWCA on it. And that is all I have. I'm happy to take questions, Christine, or whatever makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Laura, so much for walking us through where we are now. It is a lot. It is hard. It's painful to hear it, and it's painful to live it. But it is good to know that, like we are all here together in community in this moment, folks in communities. I mean, in tornadoes, in floods, right, are showing up. And as you said so correctly, and I feel like we kind of throw this around a lot, but and that's Aries. She really cares about this issue as well. But people, we have the power. We really do have the power. These folks serve us. And it is really heartening to see the incredible action around the country and in states like Tennessee, and in Alabama and others where folks are really coming together in community, truly, sun, rain, or tornadoes. So we've got a couple of questions. So thank you, Gloria Chun-Hu, for raising your question. Gloria wants to know if you can explain a little bit more about the administrative burdens to election officials.
Yes, thank you for that question, Gloria. So one part of it is just it's probably pretty obvious that with constantly changing laws, so it's one thing for state lawmakers to sit up in their capital and decide this is how it should be or that's how it should be, but they don't actually make those laws. They don't implement them. They don't make them reality. Election officials and election workers do. And so when that's changing year to year, it's really tough to keep up, especially in this moment post 2020, when if folks don't know, there's been sort of tremendous turnover among election workers because there's been so much threat, and so many attacks from, frankly, bad actors and today also the federal government. And so there's like new people coming in who don't have years of experience running elections. And on top of being pretty green, the laws are changing year to year, in many cases. So that's part of it. And then another part of it is the fact that they're not these laws don't come with funding in a lot of cases. And so you're an election official and you're meant to change the entire way that you do voter registration overnight, and you don't have any money to do it. And that's part of the reason SPLC does a bunch of advocacy on election funding. It's kind of like the sort of more quiet or hidden form of voter suppression is just like starving elections. So they close polling places, or they end voter education and outreach, et cetera. So that's part of it. I'm happy to talk more about it. If you want to follow up offline, there's a number of issues. I do think the attacks on election workers, both formally through law and criminal penalties, and then just from like vigilantes and bad actors who are, conspiracy theorists or otherwise just trying to undermine confidence in elections. And we know that this disproportionately impacts election workers of color, as we've seen in Georgia and elsewhere. So.
Yeah, thank you so much for that answer, Laura. And it is truly egregious to see, potential criminal penalties to folks who are truly the civic servants who are really trying to serve communities, as election officials to help our democracy exist, right? So thanks so much for explaining more about that. I've got another question for you, Laura. So the question is, would the case in North Dakota about individuals being able to sue under the VRA impact the legitimacy of the Calais decision, since it was a group of individuals that sued for discrimination to begin with? If you have thoughts on that.
It's a great question and a very I think astute point, right? Because if you believe that individuals don't have the right to sue to protect their voting rights, then these non-African American white voters in Louisiana didn't have the right to bring that case in the first place. So I think that's right on. Unfortunately, our court doesn't seem to. Well, first of all, the Supreme Court has not made it weighed in on the question of the private right of action. The highest court decision in that case is from the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals. So just to say, the Supreme Court has not actually, it's not contradicting itself because it hasn't weighed in on that yet. But I will say the Calais decision it's extraordinary in many respects, including just how disingenuous and how many somersaults they're turning in to try to explain and justify just completely wrongheaded, untethered from both reality and precedent that decision is. The other sort of answer to your question is, I mean, I would think, well, now I'm going to speak a little bit out of turn because I'm not a litigator. But if you don't have Section 2 anymore, which is the section that the Calais case gutted part of, and the Brnovich case before it gutted the other part of, if you don't have that in practice, then whether or not you have a private right of action doesn't doesn't totally matter because the private right of action case is about Section 2. But I'll stop there. But anyway, great point.
Yeah, fantastic point. And I see you in the chat, Barbara, saying, this may be the new Dred Scott case. Following along that same line, we had another question for you. We know, I think we all deeply feel and understand just how much the Calais decision is going to impact and harm people of color, particularly Black voters across the South. But how do we do a good job of communicating that this is going to hurt everybody, right? How do we talk? How do we widen the tent, so to speak, to really make sure that folks really see themselves in this fight if they're not from a community of color? How do we reach more people and bring them into the fold?
Yeah. That's a great question. And one thing, this is not directly responsive to that, but one thing it feels really important to note is some of our organizers have talked to community members, particularly Black community members in the South, who've said, oh, I can't vote now, or, oh, they've taken away my right to vote. There's a lot of confusion, but also and frankly, I think disinformation going around about this. I think there are bad actors who are going to try to propagate that narrative, and that's not true. Calais has dramatically limited the ability of voters of color to vindicate their rights to fair representation, and it did not take away the right to vote. And so I do think that's just an important point of to communicate that everyone who was eligible before still is eligible to vote. But I don't know. I would say a couple things. One, our democracy is strongest with all of us, and so any time a certain community or set of communities are silenced or had their voices, diluted, our democracy is weaker, both at like a principles and kind of conceptual level, but also in practice, because at the end of the day, the policies that actually like benefit and improve the lives of the masses, working people of all races and ethnicities, are policies that are going to be even harder to pass and to protect under a one-party system in the South, for example, which is what we might be looking at post-Calais. And so I think I would also, sometimes talking about democracy is like a little esoteric and not that motivating for people. It's certainly motivating for some people, but not as many for others. So I'd probably like think about the issues. Yeah, present company. But I'd probably think about the issues that like really do motivate like the vast majority of us: cost of living, healthcare, education, et cetera, and try to make a connection between what, particularly communities of color, absence from fair representation, and the sort of attempt to diminish that power is going to have on those policies and by extension, on people's ability to thrive and to afford to live.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And thank you for the reminder about the confusion that's out there. So I'm going to go ahead and charge all of us on this call to make sure that we're letting people know, like, your access to voting, right? With the SAVE 2.0, what we call the suite of bills, the Save America Act and the SAVE Act that Laura walked us through earlier, those bills are trying to take away our access. This structural decision, this is about fair representation. And we want to make sure that everybody knows and is not confused about the fact that the right to vote was not challenged in this particular Supreme Court case. And we need to make sure that we're constantly cutting through the noise. Our ability as, trusted people in our own communities, with our loved ones, with our family members, with our colleagues, we can cut through that noise so quickly and easily. So I'm going to charge all of us with making sure that we're always doing that in our communities, so that people know that their constitutional right to vote is still protected and nothing has changed because of this decision.
Christine, can I say one more thing super briefly?
Yes,
just
absolutely.
that question. The last thing I would say is, like, anybody who thinks that authoritarian forces are going to stop at trying to disenfranchise one particular community, like, is living on a different planet. This is like they're coming for all of us freedom-loving people whatever our race and ethnicity, whatever our income, whatever our ability status. Folks who believe in justice and who believe in multiracial democracy have a lot, stand to lose a lot. And so we have to stand up together and fight.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And you made a very important point. Any time a single party is in kind of universal power, that's not the democracy that our founding fathers wanted to set up. That is not in the spirit of what our nation is supposed to be. It's not good for anybody when we only have one point of view. This point of view, I think we all agree, is not the one we want. But universally, we need to have different voices at the table. I've got a question here from Jade Thomas. Thanks, Jade, for your question. Does SPLC have a resource for tracking changes to election and voting laws around the country? And I'll let Laura answer this. And I'll also add there are a couple of different resources, so we'll be happy to follow up with what Laura shares and those additional things as well with folks.
That's actually what I was going to do, Christine. We don't have a sort of like holistic resource that you could, as a one-stop shop to go to, especially for states outside of the South where we focus. But there's organizations like the Voting Rights Lab, which compiles state law changes in both positive and negative directions for voting rights. And the Brennan Center does the same thing. So yeah, Christine, I can drop a couple of those in the chat, or we can circulate them afterward. There's a number of really helpful resources out there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Laura. If folks find, if y'all find that you've got additional questions or thoughts that you want to share, please continue to raise those. But I am so grateful for all the information you shared and all the work that you're doing, Laura. And I am really excited to move us to the next part of our presentation, where we're going to get to hear some really valuable and important perspectives from YWCA. So I am really excited to bring to the stage Paige Robar of YWCA USA and Michaela Wright from YWCA Mahoning Valley. This, at the end of the day, this whole campaign, this challenge is about community. It's about community connections. It's the work that we do at YWCA, and I am just thrilled to turn this over to you all to share your insights, your thoughts, your experiences with the crew here today.
Thanks everyone so much for being here. Laura, thank you so much for speaking with us. Christine, for hosting. I am so proud of this program. We have been doing the challenge. This is year 8, and I've had the privilege of working on this program all 8 of those years. So it's really incredible how it has evolved, changed, and really continues to meet the moment. I'm very, very proud of the team that worked on this. So again, we launched the challenge in Cleveland back in 2019. And I think what stood out to me even then was how hungry people were for information. People were eager to understand the systems that are shaping all of our lives. And I think that's even more true now than it was back in 2019. People are asking really hard questions. I hope the challenge helped you ask those hard questions. They want to know how we got here. They want to know the context for the injustices that they're seeing and that they're feeling every day. It's every day. Because you can feel the weight of it, right? The impact systemic inequalities are having right now, the history. But without the context, you're not going to be able to really clearly name it, trace it, and it feels really isolating when you're in that position. What this program does, what the challenge does, is give people the language and context to connect the dots. What you're experiencing isn't random. It's rooted in history and policy and all of the systems that we've built over time. And once you have that understanding, I hope you feel less isolated after you've been through this program. I hope it is energizing. I hope it is something that you can act on. Laura gave us some really great insights. And that's why we chose voting rights this year. This is a pivotal moment. And for as long as the United States has existed, restricting access to voting has been a tool for marginalizing and maintaining control over people of color, women, and women of color in particular. And despite the recent Supreme Court decisions that would just rather ignore all of that, it's true. It's a fact. Voting rights are about who gets to shape their community, who gets to influence the structures that impact all of our lives. And when access is limited, so is power. And when people understand that connection, it changes how they engage in elections and civic life, and even in their day-to-day relationships. It helps you understand. And YWCA isn't new to this. From the suffragist movement, civil rights movement, the work you've learned about during the challenge, we have been on the front lines of expanding access, equity, and making sure that people are able to exercise their voice. This work is embedded in who we are as an organization. It's not something we step into every few years. This is a generational project, generational work. And it's just really important that we, continue to stay true to each other and stay true to our mission. I'm going to hand things off to Michaela in a minute, but I just want to thank Christine, Sloan again, Roxanne Vigil, Jessica Hopkins, who all made this challenge possible, and helped curating, putting together all that content on the website for us. If you would like to support YWCA's work in this space, please visit ywca.org and make a gift. There's a lot of resources, a lot of time that go into this project, and we truly appreciate all the support you can send our way. Michaela Wright, thank you for being here with us. The mission officer at YWCA Mahoning Valley. We would love to hear from you about the work going on in your community and your experience with this program as well.
Yes. First, I just want to thank you for having me. It's just been an honor to be a part of the network and to be on and learning from Laura. So I really appreciate that. But yes, I have been with YWCA Mahoning Valley since 2019. So the challenge was new. It was an exciting time to learn about it and to see how it has grown. And so since then until now, doing the challenge, we've gotten a lot of people reach out to us about wanting to adapt or adopt the challenge for themselves, wanting to use content or make their own content based on it. And we've had some great partnerships with organizations and groups who have wanted to do this challenge. And it has just been amazing to see the growth. So kudos to you, Paige, for all your work and the YWCA team in Cleveland and in USA. It's been really great. The impact is definitely there. We have partnered with, like I said, other groups to do similar challenges. And I just think the content is excellent.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about what's going on the ground in Mahoning Valley? What voting rights work you guys are doing there?
Sure. So YWCA Mahoning Valley, we just hosted our Until Justice Justice event on April 15th. We had a voting rights forum, and we partnered with the League of Women Voters of Greater Youngstown and a group in our area called the Community Mobilization Coalition. And they shared insights and information on the SAVE Act, what's happening locally, what's happening statewide, what's happening federally, and also just providing resources, urging people to make sure they're checking their registration, educating people on what they can do, and just really highlighting and emphasizing the importance of exercising the right to vote. There are other organizations doing similar work that YWCA Mahoning Valley partners with. There is Sojourn to the Past, which is a youth organization that shares history and education around voting rights or around civil rights history. We've partnered with them many times. I mentioned the Community Mobilization Coalition and the League of Women Voters, of course. And we also have the Mahoning Valley Freedom Fighters who are doing a lot of advocacy work around voting rights as well. So although, there are a lot of issues, and this is an ever relevant issue, voting rights, people in our valley, in our community, are stepping up and doing what they can to shout out, please vote, or to honor or recognize the fact that we need to protect our right to vote.
Awesome. Are there any other takeaways from the challenge that you would like to share with the group?
Sure. Just, when I think about YWCA's mission of eliminating racism, voting rights is so key to that because many of the tactics used to attack voting rights are rooted in racism. And so throughout the challenge, we've learned so much. Some things we may have already known and just got a refresher, but, we know about slavery and we learned about the Three-Fifths Compromise and how African Americans were seen as less than human. Down the road, we learned about the poll taxes, the literacy tests, gerrymandering. We learned about, Native Americans' barriers to fair representation, whether it be, not having a traditional mailing address or being the distance between their homes and their polling location. Women of color and the efforts that they put forth to try to secure voting rights. It was all very inspiring, some of it daunting, but it just showed the importance of why we do this work. We talked about last week's Supreme Court decision, and, I was seeing a lot of reactions online regarding that decision. And there's a Black woman author, Austin Channing Brown. She shared a post about how she and her cousins are the first generation in her family born with the right to vote. And she's like 41 years old. And so that just goes to show, she went on to say that, democracy in America is very young. And it just shows how frustrating it is that, we're still fighting for these freedoms, still fighting for these rights. And that, to me, really put in perspective the challenge and the importance of voting rights. That content, the historical content leading up until now, and seeing how history is trying to repeat itself and, where we need to insert ourselves to insert the power that we do have, is just, it's major. It's so important. And that's why I appreciate the resources that you all have cultivated and provided to share with our community. And I think that impact is so great. One other takeaway I think that is great about the challenge is that the content spans across different areas, different states of the nation. And that's very representative of local YWCA associations that are in different areas across the USA. And it just shows, not only our unique challenges, but it shows the common thread and the things that we're dealing with. And not only does it show the patterns within the system that we need to change, it shows us, the power that we need to reclaim. And so, I'll just say, day 14, the NPR Code Switch interview with Stacey Abrams really stood out to me. She laid out the 10 steps to autocracy or ending democracy. And, she highlighted how steeped the United States is in that process. And that can seem very overwhelming to think about and, almost impossible to overcome. But she offered some insight that was hopeful. And she said, if you can recognize it, you can fight it. And so basically going on to say that we need to demand the government that we know we deserve. And in order to do that, we have to vote.
Yeah. Thank you, Michaela.
Yeah.
Yeah. I so appreciate you being here.
Thank
Christine?
you.
Yeah, I just thank you so much, Michaela. And of course, here at USA, like our job is to support you all. You all are really doing the core work, the real community connective work, out in the real world beyond this Washington, D.C. bubble, as I like to refer to it, which is not the real world at all. And I wanted to ask you, you were sharing about the incredibly important work that you're doing around civic engagement, registering voters, getting folks to check their registration. And I'm just wondering, you know, I know all of us that do this work are encountering plenty of folks who feel really disconnected or are like, the system doesn't work for me. This isn't, I'm just not interested in voting. How are you all thinking about and approaching, in your conversations in your community? What is some tips of the trade from you all around how you're engaging folks and really bringing them in?
Yes, I think we just need to stress the urgency. Another thing or tactic is the issue is if you get people to believe that their vote doesn't matter, that's how all this, just goes to ruin. I think, highlighting how important it is and understanding the history, like what the challenge provides, especially for people of color, for African Americans. Our ancestors fought, died, did so much, put forth so much effort to obtain the right to vote. And so understanding that and putting that in perspective, we owe it to them, but we owe it to ourselves too, and to the generations that come after us, to fight for these rights and these freedoms. And I think just emphasizing that, not backing down and allowing it to just happen to us, continuing to maintain conversations and to lead those conversations, I think is very important.
Yeah, it is so important. Thank you for that, Michaela. It's so important to talk about all of these issues, not just around election time, right? But like we live in a live participatory democracy and we have to constantly water that garden, right? And keep folks engaged. So it's such a really powerful point. I know we are coming up on the last 5 minutes. This is such a rich discussion, and I so appreciate all of it. And so I want to ask both of you to share, to leave everybody here with your thoughts on what is giving you hope right now. What's giving you hope around, and let's, never mind. I had a thought. I've changed my mind. Share with us what is really getting you out of bed every morning and making you feel the power of the people, as Laura was talking about earlier. I'll kick it first to you, Paige, and then Michaela, I want to hear your thoughts to wrap us up.
Yeah. I think seeing everyone engage in this project and this conversation has been really uplifting for me personally. It's amazing to see you guys in the chat and the website version of the challenge. It's incredibly wonderful to see that so many people are out there having these conversations. So that has been a big thing lately, but in general, it's just all the engagement, and the YWCA team. It's an amazing group of people.
Yes, and I would agree. I personally, voting rights is close to home. I have some local civil rights leaders in my family, so I do it for them. I do it for myself, and I feel like like Paige said, hope comes from seeing groups come together, especially groups who are in environments where this work is not popular, but they're doing it anyway because they know that it's going to benefit the whole. Um, the YWCA network is so strong and our mission is so necessary. And seeing you all, wherever you are, doing the work of the mission, that gives me hope. And so we're going to keep continuing and moving forward.
Michaela, that is so powerful. And I'm just gonna repeat and reiterate that's the perfect way for us to close this out because I hope we heard some bad news, we heard some powerful news, we heard some good experiences, right? But hope comes from when people come together. It comes from being in community with each other like we are in this moment right now. So I want to thank Laura Williamson. I want to thank Paige Robar. Thank you to Michaela Wright especially for all the work you're doing each day in your community on the ground. And we are going to close out until justice just is for this year. We're going to put up this QR code. If you can grab your phone, take a scan, let us know how we did. Let us know your last thoughts. How was your experience today? Your experience matters. It's what drives us to do this work, and it helps to shape us as we do this work to do this better every time. So please take a moment to fill out that survey, and thank you so much to everyone that joined us today.